I've just thought something that I haven't thought since 2001, in fact. I don't think I've ever told you this, but the first news story I ever wrote was a tip-off from you, and it was about the formation of Cancer Research UK in 2000. Sorry, I'm just having a little moment where I've just realised that my entire journalistic career is actually is linked directly to you. So thank you for that. Now, after the Nobel, and after you moved into these more sort of statesman positions and administrative positions within science and with governance, did you miss the lab? Was there no lab work after?
No, I spent the entire day in my lab today. I've run a number of things. I was head of a department in Oxford. Then I ran the science in the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. Then I was director of the whole thing. I promoted the merger to make Cancer Research UK, and I ran that. And then I ran Rockefeller University and then the Royal Society. So I've done a lot of these things, but I have always had a laboratory that's taken around a third of my working life all the time during that process.
Is that the proportion, a third?
About a third. It's increasing a little now because I've dropped the Royal Society, but yeah.
Do you feel, as I sometimes do, when I have the privilege of returning to a molecular biology lab, that you feel like you're at home?
You know, it's what keeps me going, really. It's this almost unhealthy curiosity, passion to understand how certain things work. I sometimes worry about myself. Why am I so obsessed with these sorts of problems? I've sat there this afternoon with a couple of my graduate students, and what's great about it, I'm sitting there with a 23-year-old, with an ancient person like me. We are just equals there, banging around these ideas. You know, they know 10 times more about what they've done than I do. I have some low cunning, which is sometimes helpful for this. And I'm just back in my mid-20s again.
Yes, there is something about the feel of a pipette in your hand, though. I don't think. Do you feel that too when you sit at the bench and it just sits so nicely in your hand?
I'm not quite as strange as you, Adam. So I mean, but I do like looking at pictures. I do like looking at data, and most of all, I like talking to people.
Absolutely. Tell us about the Crick then. So I'll come back to some of the Royal Society in a minute. But as of now, the Crick is it fully operational?
The Crick is probably the largest biomedical research laboratory, certainly in Europe, possibly in the world. It's very, very big. It's a million square feet. It's behind the British Library next to St Pancras. It's the merger of 3 research institutes, 2 from Cancer Research UK, 1 from the Medical Research Council, all located in London, all going to be co-located together with, so that's from the MRC, Cancer Research UK and the Wellcome Trust. And then we have links with 3 universities, Imperial, King's and University College London. And we are having a slightly anarchic approach. I have no departments, no divisions, just groups, 120 groups, give them a lot of freedom to discover things and then capture things very effectively that could be useful for application. So my approach here is, rather than to direct top down and tell people what to do, which is quite often the case, is to give freedom to the true creators, but make sure with the very high standards, because I'm quite critical of maintaining high standards, but then capturing things very effectively that can be perhaps applied.
And where does that model come from? Because that is not typical. I don't know of any other labs that have.
There's other
taken
places
that
that do it. In fact, we talked about Jim Watson. He ran Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories in New York, which operated that way. Rockefeller University I ran in New York in a very similar sort of way. But it is not the usual way. The usual way is, and you understand why, is that somebody wants to start an institute. It'll be smaller, because my institute will be 1,500, 1,600 scientists, and they'll have to have some focus to give critical mass. And so they'll say, well, we'll have a stem cell institute. And that's for 100 researchers. They get on and do things. But the problem is that such institutes can get stale over the years because things move on. But if you're labelled in a particular way, it's more difficult to move on. The way I'm operating this is it's large, so we can have breadth. It's got a lot of turnover, because most people who come there will be group leaders only for 10 or 12 years.
Right, so there's this time limit.
There's a time limit.
On all staff.
So I recruit across the world import, take, of course, outstanding UK scientists too, and nurture them, support them for 10 or 12 years, and then export them. They can't stay there. They can't ossify, which is what can happen in traditional universities and
I was talking
institutes.
recently to one of the members of staff at the Crick, and he described exactly that process, that we get the best minds from abroad and from the UK in, keep them for 5 years or 8 years.
Or longer, actually, 10 years, a career stage,
or
actually,
longer,
a career stage.
and then boot them out. But the secret plan, what he said, is that because they're mid-career, sort of in their 30s to 40s, that actually they'll fall in love and marry some Brit, and that we'll keep them there as a result of those laws. And then he said, it's a form of eugenics, positive eugenics. We want the best minds in the world to be integrated into the British gene pool.
Well, it's true. This was one of my cunning plans, the falling in love. And I even think every month on a Friday should have a party, and have a party that we could invite lawyers and entrepreneurs and merchant bankers and so on, and mix them all up and hope for love, and then they'll want to stay. It's a good plan.
It's not a bad plan at all. I love the fact that you're setting up a research institute that is basically a dating agency. Let's do some...
I'm not correcting you.
No, I don't. That's, you know this is all being filmed. Let's
no, I didn't.
Do some... Let us just do some biographical information, because there's some quite interesting stories held within there. So why don't we just do a sort of quick fire? I won't ask you how old you are. How old are you?
I'm 66.
So born in...
1949.
1949, so just after...
So you don't get embarrassed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
49. Where?
I was born in Norwich, Norfolk. My mum and dad used to talk like this, you see.
So I'm from Ipswich.
But you see, you don't sound like an intellectual if you have a Norfolk accent, so we had to learn to speak a bit differently.
Yes, you just about...
We were meant to laugh out there, by the way.
Managed to hide that. So, you know I'm from Ipswich, so that
I do know you're from Suffolk.
Makes us mortal rivals.
Yes.
Yes. You don't support Norwich, do you?
I have no alternative. They are in the relegation zone.
Yeah, we're in the playoffs. So did you go to school in Norfolk?
No, I didn't. I was born there, and I stayed there only as a baby. I was actually brought up for the first part of my life in Neadston. There are people who live in Neadston. And then moved to Wembley, to Alperton on the Piccadilly line.
And so schooled in North London?
North London. I went to local primary school in Wembley, and then to Harrow County School, and I was just shown a picture of 1960 Harrow County School, and I was somewhere on it, but as there were, just before this this interview, and there were 1,000 boys on it, and I couldn't find myself.
Couldn't manage to find yourself in there. And now, before we get to university and how you got into the research, family setup.
Yes, well, that's a little complicated, actually. I came from a working class family. I had 2 brothers and a sister, and a grandmother and 2 parents. And we all lived in 2-bedroom apartments, so it wasn't really very luxurious. And I was the only one who stayed at school after 15, so it was a bit of a surprise that I became an academic. And being a geneticist, I just wondered all my life why I was rather different from the rest of my family. When I was in New York, I had to apply for a green card, and I sent off all the application and to the Homeland Security. And to my surprise, I was rejected. Now, it was a bit of a surprise because I, at the time, was a Nobel Laureate, I was knighted, and I was president of Rockefeller University, which is the most wealthiest per capita university in the United States. But they'd rejected me because they did not like my birth certificate. I had what is called a short birth certificate, which only names where you were born and so on, doesn't name your parents. I asked my parents why I had a short birth certificate, and they told me because it was cheaper than a long birth certificate. And I was naive enough to actually believe them, okay? In fact, it was a birth certificate invented to deal with high rates of illegitimacy in the war and just after the Second World War. So I told my PA, let's just write off registry office will get a full birth certificate, which of course I could have got any time in the previous 50 years. It came back And she gave it to me, and I was in the room. I'd just been on holiday, and there were several people in the room. My lab manager, my wife was there, my PA and her secretary. So there were 4 women in the room. And she said to me, "Is it possible you got the name of your mother wrong?" I said, "Of course I didn't get the name of my mother wrong. You know, every time I have to use my credit card, I have to say who my mother's maiden name is, you know, all those sorts of things." So I said, "No, it's not possible." So she didn't say anything, and she gave me the envelope, and I opened it. And there, the name of my mother was the name of my sister. My sister was 17 years older than me, and I looked at it, and I just couldn't understand it. And then I looked to my father, and there was just a blank, a line. And my wife came over and looked over my shoulder and said, "You know what this might mean?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know," being a bit slow. And she said, "Well, I think you might be illegitimate." So I looked at it again, of course, and that's exactly what had happened. My mother, who I thought was my sister, got pregnant at 17, was sent to Norwich, away from Leedston, to her aunt. This is like a Victorian novel, of course. Was sent to Norwich, gave birth to me. My grandmother came up to her daughter, pretended she was the mother, and came back with me to protect her daughter. And I'm a geneticist, I'm a good geneticist, and my family kept this secret for me for over 50 years, half a century. And by the time I found out, actually, my mother had died. She died at 70, rather young. What were now my grandparents. You understand, everybody changed.
Yes.
You know,
it's fractionally confusing.
It's really peculiar, actually, because I find myself, I have to say, everybody has got 2 designations. So it's my sister mother and my mother grandmother. I say what I used to be and what they are now. So my brothers became my uncles, my sister became my mother, I mean, it's all very, very confusing.
Change your relationship with your sibling. I just think about, I've got a brother who's 16 years younger than me, and I'm pretty sure he's not my father. Or the other way around.
Other way around. Yes.
Yeah, but yes, that would be really weird. But did it change your relationship with what you'd spent 50 years thinking were your siblings?
Well, my I had my siblings who weren't my siblings, and they had difficulty coming to terms with that, really. But I acquired new siblings because my mother got married. There's a very poignant photograph, actually. When her marriage photograph, she's holding the hand of her new husband in one hand and my hand in the other. I was 2.5, and of course she was leaving home because she'd sort of been part of looking after me for that 2.5 years, albeit in secret. And she had 3 children, legitimate children, with her new husband, who knew nothing of this, absolutely nothing of this. And she used to keep 4 photographs beside her bed. I discovered this after her death, of 4 babies. I was the 4th. And when she was asked about it, she said, "Well, he was like my baby brother." But obviously this was tragedy for her. I mean, it wasn't for me. I used to say, well, you know, my parents were a little elderly, and I used to say it's like being brought up by your grandparents. And I was being brought up by my grandparents.
Yes, precisely. And as a geneticist, you're perhaps the best person on earth to try and establish what your patrilineage is. Your father. Any attempt, interest?
If this was a Hollywood film, I would now sequence my DNA, okay, myself, which I could do, of course, just like that. And then, you know, mysteriously I would find out who my father is. I haven't done that. It's a little more complicated than that, as you know, probably even better than me. But I am thinking of taking it a bit more seriously. So I am going to get some information, I think, maybe even this Christmas, of, you know, these various companies, and just see if I can make some progress with it. Yeah. I might do something.
Prime candidate for who do you think you are, really?
Well, I'd say I was a brilliant one for it, you know, because I haven't the slightest idea who I am. You know?
Anyone out there from the BBC? Oh no, that's me, isn't it? That is a fascinating and you know an odd tale.
It's being a geneticist, isn't that the ultimate irony?
Yes. Yeah. That they managed to hide your genetic origin for most of your life.
And it also means, incidentally, of course, the name nurse is inherited through the maternal line.
Yes.
And actually, it then turned out that in the middle of all of this, both of my grandparents, who I thought were my parents, do forgive me, I found out that both of they were both illegitimate too.
Right.
I have barely a male ancestor in my family. And I've inherited the name Nurse twice in 3 generations through the female line.
Through 2 different directions as well.
It's just a
But
complete mess.
that's a little bit like the Darwins, though, and that's not a bad lineage to be associated with.
This is true.
There were many Darwins who shared uncles and
Yes.
close relations. Well, it's very interesting anyway. So let's just go back to, that was family history up until school. You went up to university after school in Wembley. Where was that?
I had great trouble getting into university, actually, because at the time, this is late 1960s, you needed to matriculate. This required O-levels in certain subjects, including a foreign language. And I had the distinction of failing French O-level 6 times. I have never met anybody who's failed an O-level more than twice. And I failed it 6 times, and I was rejected from every university that I applied to.
It says here you got the Légion d'honneur in 2001.
This is really true.
According to my notes. How did that work out?
Well, my French was pretty awful when I had to receive it. It's absolutely true, but I do have a Légion d'honneur, yes.
So failed French multiple
6 times.
6 times.
And I never passed it, actually. And I was only allowed into one university, University of Birmingham, where the professor of genetics, John Jinks, was looking at the people they had rejected. He was head of department, and saw I had very good A-levels, asked me to go and see him. I spent a day, I went up from Wembley. I was working as a technician in the Guinness Brewery. I went up to see, in Park Royal, I went up to see him. I had a couple of hours with him. This is the head of department, the professor, looking at failed applicants. I mean, extraordinary.
Why?
I don't know. It's just amazing. I mean, it couldn't happen today, actually. And he said, I will get a special dispensation and for you to enter the university. They gave me, Senate gave me, do you know what the condition was? I had to do 1 year of French at university.
That's cruel.
Well, even that was quite funny too, because they gave me the most junior lecturer in the French department. I was the only person in his class, of course. And he sat down rather like this in October, and he said, you know, Paul, he said, you don't want to be here, and I don't want to be here. So I'm going to give you an examination at the end of this year. It'll be 300 words of scientific French to translate into English. I will allow you to take any book you like into the examination, including a French dictionary. And should you just write down all the words in the right order from the French dictionary, I will pass you. And I don't think we need to meet again.
That is profound fraud, and I'm very disappointed. Did you tell when you received the Légion d'honneur? Did you reveal that story then?
I did.
Oh, did you?
French ambassador was actually rather. I didn't get it from the president. I got it from the French ambassador, and he was amused by it.
That's fabulous.